I was in, like I said, I serve in the Fusion middle school, high school group here, and I love serving with the kids and stuff. When I was in middle school and high school, this is what I looked like. Yeah, that's me. That's me. On the left-hand side there, you see me with that Baja coat. Those were cool when I was in 8th grade for like a good 20 seconds, and I really, really wanted one. And my mom got me one for Christmas, and that's me in like as cool guy as I could be. Now, I lived in San Diego, so I have no idea why I'm wearing a White Sox hat, but I loved that outfit. That outfit right there, I'm in full cool guy mode. Like, that's me being as cool as humanly possible. I look at the middle schoolers today, like Michael Bonaventura with his mohawk. I could never pull that off. I was never that cool. I don't understand how the kids are so cool these days. But that's me in 8th grade, and actually the center picture there, I worked at Burger King. That was my first job. In 8th grade, I got that when I turned 13. That's me working at Burger King at the cash register with my gigantic glasses. Those things are enormous. But I paid for myself to go to Europe for a month with my Boy Scout troop. We went to Amsterdam. It was a lot of fun. And that on the far right is me in my Boy Scout uniform when I went to the World Jamboree in Amsterdam for a month. Man, that guy is such a nerd. I don't know how I grew up like that. But when I was in middle school and high school, when I was that kid, for me, the definition of love was when you're going out with someone. But when high school and in middle school, when you're going out with someone right away, you're standing against a wall together, you're like 2 feet apart, and you're standing there like this, and you just every once in a while like giggle and look at each other, and you don't say anything, you don't touch, but your palms are all sweaty, and you've got the bubblies in your stomach, and you're just like all excited. That must be love, because it's the first time you've ever had anything like that, standing against a wall, hard to breathe. That must be love, right? That's what the definition of love is when you're in middle school. I mean, I was never told what love was. I was never told what sex and dating was. And so when it's left up to myself or individuals to learn what sex and dating is, it's up to the world to tell us what love and sex and dating is, right? We learn it through television, through reality TV, through the movies, through video games, through the music we listen to. The world defines for us what love is and what sex is and what marriage is or isn't in a lot of cases. And just out of high school, when I started to, end of high school and just out of high school, when I started getting in the dating world, actually, my wife made sure that I told this one story. And it's kind of embarrassing, so I'm going to ask you guys to be kind to me. If you guys are plus or minus 5 to 10 years old from me, I'm going to be 35 next month. So if you're plus or minus 5 or 10 years, you probably remember that MTV had these half-hour reality kind of blind date shows. I don't know if you guys remember these at all. They had these half-hour shows where they would be a blind date where a guy and a girl would go on a date, and they'd have some sort of twist to it and then make it a television show for a half hour. Well, I lived in San Diego about that time, and a buddy of mine, Scott, and we drove up to Los Angeles to try out for one of these shows. We wanted to be on a reality dating show on MTV. And it seemed like a good thing because I didn't know what dating was. I didn't know what it was all about. I was never told what it was, so I thought this would be a good idea. This would be fun. So we drove up to LA. We try out for this show, and I got on. I got on the show. I was going to be on this reality dating show. I was going to be set up with a girl, and the show that we got put on was called Tail Daters, where I was going to be put on a blind date with a girl, and each of us would have a friend, my buddy Scott, that would go with us, except they would follow us around in a Winnebago and watch on screens what was being filmed on this date. And then they would text message in what they thought we should say or do on this date. And it would have been extremely awkward, but that was the show we were going to be on. I was going to be on Tail Daters. I was going to be on this blind date television show. So about a month before that, before we did this, my buddy Scott had this girl that flew out from the East Coast to visit him. And they were friends, but my buddy Scott was very interested in this girl, wanted to go out with her. And so he was pursuing her like that. And I met this girl at the time, and there's a lot of other funny stories, including my hair being green, that I can't go into right now. Ask me later, including when I almost broke her hands on this. Anyway, so my buddy Scott is interested in this girl. She comes out, her and I strike up this friendship. We're friends at this point, but per the bro code, I'm not allowed to date her. I'm not allowed to go out with her. I'm not allowed to even be interested in her. I'm not allowed to look at her that way. So we're friends. We're, text messaging. We're calling. You guys remember AIM, AOL Instant Messenger? I was on AIM all the time. I still have that screen name, by the way. And so we struck up a really good friendship. Well, I told this girl, back up. I liked her. I really did. I liked her a lot, and I thought that we could have something together. But because of the bro code, I wasn't allowed to. It was hands off. So I told her about this reality dating show I was going to be on. And she got very upset. She got really upset. She got jealous, and she got really angry, and I couldn't figure out why. Lo and behold, she liked me too. She liked me. She didn't like my buddy Scott. She liked me. So I was like, oh, man, what am I going to do now? So I called up to MTV the next day, and I said, look, I appreciate it. This would have been a lot of fun, but I can't be on the show. So I wasn't on Tail Daters. I wasn't on a reality television show. So then the next day, I'm with my buddy Scott, and we're skateboarding down the San Diego boardwalk, and because that's what you do. It's not really a boardwalk. It's kind of a boardwalk. But anyway, so we're skating down the boardwalk, and I have to ask my buddy. I said, look, Scott, I like this girl. We want to go out. Are you cool with that? And after asking me some really hard questions, he gave me permission. He gave me permission to date this girl. So I followed the bro code. He gave me his blessing. We dated for a little bit, and we've now been married for 11 plus years. She turned out to be my wife. And we have our first son. And because I followed the bro code, Scott was one of my groomsmen, and I was the best man at his wedding. So if that's lesson one, follow the bro code. All right. So we leave it up to the world to tell us what love and sex and dating really is when we really don't know what it is. And I feel like in that age that I was in middle school and high school and just after high school, it's a really vulnerable time where we're trying to figure things out. We're trying to figure out what is love, what is sex, what is purity, and how does that all fit in my life? And if I had known the truth behind it, I probably never would have tried to go on that television show. But because I didn't know what it was and I left it up to the world, then that's when I kind of let the world's lies filter in to be my definition for what love and sex and dating is. So today, we're going to be looking into God's Word. We're going to be looking into His Word to learn about two principles that will cover over and reveal the lies for a lot of what the world has. These two principles. Now, before we jump into it, there's a quote from a pastor that I heard a long time ago, and you'll have to forgive me. I don't remember the exact pastor, and I don't even remember the exact quote because it was a long time ago. But the quote essentially went something like this. If as a speaker, if I speak truth and no one leaves angry today, then I haven't done my job. If I speak truth and everyone leaves happy and feeling good, I haven't done my job. Some of the things we're going to talk about today are a little hard to hear. Some of the principles that we're going to learn can be a little bit biting. They can dig at us a little bit, and that can be good. If I'm speaking truth and you guys feel that, that means that God's working in something. God's revealing something in your life that you maybe should take a look at. And if you guys want to talk about that a little more, if you feel that, I'm sure Andrew, Chris, the elders, we would love to be able to talk to you about it. Come find one of them. Find me. I'm none of the above, pastor or elder. I'm just a volunteer. So you can come find me and talk to me. But I'll probably direct you to one of them. We would love to be able to talk to you more about it. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first principle we're going to be looking at and learning about today has to do with sex and purity. Now, the world has a lot of lies about sex and purity. They tell us a lot of things. The main one and the big one that starts with is that virginity and purity are something to be ashamed of. We see this in movies like 40-Year-Old Virgin and American Pie, where the point of the movie, the entire purpose, is to have the main character lose their virginity. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter with who, doesn't matter the relationship. The point is to lose your virginity. And so that's the premise behind the movie, because you know what? Sex is a rite of passage. Sex is a rite of passage to where if you don't have sex yet, if you're not a real man until you've had sex, you're not a real woman until you've had sex, to the point where some boys consider going to a prostitute just to lose their virginity, so they don't leave high school still being a virgin. That if you leave high school still being a virgin, you're not really moving on with your life and you're not progressing. That's a huge lie that the world tells us, because you know what? It's okay to have sex with anyone as long as you use protection. You can have sex with anyone you want. It's okay as long as you use protection. We see this in television shows like Friends and How I Met Your Mother and Sex and the City and Seinfeld, where you're not really in a relationship with somebody. You're not really going out with someone until you're having sex with them. As a matter of fact, the world has established a number of dates where you go, where you're supposed to be having sex with that person. And if you're not, then something's wrong. This is also the concept where you get friends with benefits, where it doesn't matter the relationship. It doesn't matter where you are, but you can have sex with anybody you want as long as you wear protection. Because you know what? And this is our fourth lie. Sex is a biological need. You need to have it. You have to have that release. That you are incomplete without sex. That if you don't have sex, then you can't be a functional member of society. We see this in movies like American Pie, where teenagers are masturbating with food and musical instruments just to have that release. Just so they can have that release and be a functional member of society, they need to have that to be a functional member, because you need it. Is a biological need. And sex is just physical, and you have to have that biological need. Now, this fifth one is a little bit hard. It has to do with pornography. Pornography is good, that it's normal, that if you don't look at it, you're weird, that it's encouraged and it's fun, and there's something wrong with you if you don't use pornography. Now, the Bible doesn't have a glossary in the back. The Bible doesn't have a dictionary where they can define certain words for us, and actually the word pornography is actually newer than when the Bible was written. It came about by a combination of a couple of Greek words. And so the word pornography doesn't actually appear in the Bible. But when we look at the principles that God has, when we look at what purity and sex is supposed to be, we can learn what the truth is behind pornography. Now, when I say pornography, the definition of pornography in the dictionary that we have today is any picture, video, audio, writing, or the like meant for sexual arousal. Its purpose is for sexual arousal. It says nothing about how much skin is shown. It says nothing about how much clothing is shown. It says nothing about if you have to type in your birthday in order to get on the website. It simply says if it's meant for sexual arousal. This would include things like Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. This would include things like a lot of commercials that you see on television. This would include things like Victoria's Secret catalogs. And for the girls, and one of the reasons why I'm not on social media is a lot of times it's the pictures that are posted online, the pictures that are taken in the mirror, the bikini shots that are posted online. I can't control what I see on social media a lot of times because I can't control what my friends are posting, but I can control what I look at. And so that's why I stopped social media, because a lot of times those things, if we're honest and you're really honest with yourself, it's meant for sexual arousal. It's meant to get the attention of somebody, and it's meant to arouse something in the guys. Pornography is a huge lie that the world tells us. So turn with me in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and we're going to learn about what God's truth is behind sex and purity. Now, as you guys turn there to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, sometimes when we're studying the Word, it helps to understand the background behind the words that are written, the political and economic environment, who's writing it, who's being written to, who's the target audience. And in Corinthians, the target audience is the church in Corinth. Now, the church in Corinth, it was a shipping town, and right behind Corinth is actually still a city in Greece. You can go there if you want. Right behind Corinth, there was a mountain, and on this mountain, there was a temple, the temple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of sex and love. Actually, that term Aphrodite is where we get our word aphrodisiac, the Greek goddess of sex and love. And now, if you wanted to pay tribute to Aphrodite, you would go to the temple and you would pay one of the priestesses to have sex. In this temple, there were priestesses, they were female priestesses, and if you paid them, you would have sex with them. Didn't matter how old or how young you were, didn't matter if you were male or female, didn't matter if you were married or not. If you wanted to pay tribute to Aphrodite, you would pay these priestesses to have sex. And at the time that Paul wrote this book of 1 Corinthians, there are over 1,000 priestesses in the temple of Aphrodite. Over 1,000 prostitutes in service of Aphrodite in the temple. And these priestesses, they lived in the city of Corinth. And that framework, that mindset of that sex is just physical, it doesn't matter, we're tribute to Aphrodite, that mindset and the mindset of what love is, that love is just a feeling, that you can love someone 1 minute and then not love them the next and move right on to the next person, that love is just a feeling and sex is just physical, permeated into the very culture of the people. It permeated into their very definitions to the point where throughout Rome, there were some terms that were coined, including Corinthianized. If you were a Corinthianized person, you were someone that practiced fornication. You were someone that practiced immorality if you were Corinthianized. And if you were a Corinth girl, you were a prostitute. That was another slang term for prostitute. Just like we have hooker today, their slang term for prostitute was Corinthian girl. You know, the United States isn't so much different from that. We're not so different from Corinth, where the United States, through our culture, through our media, through movies and television and reality TV, we're telling the world what sex is. We're telling the world what love is. We even have our own Sin City, where at any point you can walk through Las Vegas at night and the streets are paved in pornography. We have our own Sin City. These words that Paul is writing to the Corinthians, he is trying to redefine for the Corinthians what sex is and what purity really is. We need a new definition as well, away from what Hollywood tells us the definition for sex and purity is. So we can read these words in 1 Corinthians just as easily and need this new definition just as much as the Corinthians did. So let's look in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, starting in verse 13, and we'll read through what God says. We're going to read through verse 20, and then we'll go back and pull it apart a little bit. So let's go ahead and start in verse 13. You say food for the stomach and stomach for the food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead and will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take a member of Christ and unite it with a prostitute? Never. Do you know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her body? For it is said, two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Now, there's a lot here. There's really a lot of stuff that Paul goes into here, and we don't have time to pull it all apart. But I'm a guy of lists. I really like lists. They keep my thoughts organized pretty easily for me. So I have 4 points that I really want to pull out of this. And we could dig into this more, like I said, but we really just want to pull those 4 points out. The first one is that sex is more than just physical. Paul starts out in verse 13 by saying, food is for the stomach and stomach for the food, and God will destroy them both. This was a phrase that was common in Corinth. The point of it is the stomach is built for food. That was its purpose. You give it food for sustenance, and that you don't really give the stomach anything else. The point is that our bodies, with our parts and the way that we're built for sex. This was the mindset of the Corinthians, that we're built for sex. This is what we're made for, so we're going to give sex to the body. Just as we give the stomach food, we're going to give sex to the body. But Paul is telling us that we are built for so much more, that our bodies are meant for so much more. The proof that you can prove to yourself that sex is more than just physical, you can ask yourself one of 2 questions. Why is it that sexual abuse against a child sticks with the person even to adulthood? More than any physical abuse does. Sexual abuse sticks with somebody. Why is rape so much different than physical abuse? As abhorrent and detestable as physical abuse is against a child, against a woman, against anybody, as horrible as it is, why is rape so much different? Because sexual abuse and rape, they touch the person. Sex touches the person in the core of their being and who they are. It goes so much deeper than just the physical realm. You guys, the world treats sex as purely physical, as something that is just on the outside. It's just the body. But we know that sex is so much more. Paul talks about here where he says, do you not know that that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her body? Paul is going back to to Genesis, where God sets up what sex is and what marriage is, where they become one. And that's our second point, is that sex is meant for marriage. That sex inside of marriage is a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing, and it's made by God for inside of that covenant of marriage. But outside of that, it can be destructive. If Paul talks about in here, he says, in verse 15, Shall I then take a member of Christ and unite him with a prostitute? He's saying that if you've accepted Christ, Christ is living inside of you, and you are literally taking Christ, taking God to that bed with you. You are taking the creator of the universe and your Savior to that bed with you into that sexual sin. I mean, that's just, I can't even think about that. That's just crazy that we would do that. We all would do that. You are taking Christ. There's a lie that the world tells us that practice makes perfect, that I need to be practiced at sex in order to be good for my future spouse. That if I practice at it, then I'll be good at it, and I can take that to the marriage with me, and my spouse will appreciate it. But you know what? There's no prize. Do we get a trophy for it if we're good at sex when we get married? Do we get some sort of reward for it? No. There's no prize for it. There's no benefit of it. Exclusivity is a better gift for your spouse than practice. Being exclusive for your future spouse is better than being practiced. Sexual sin, it benefits our own body. It's extremely selfish. We're saying, I want this, my body wants this, I'm going to give my body what I think it wants. And it's extremely selfish. It's an extremely selfish perspective, but our bodies were meant for so much more. As we go into verse 19 at the bottom, he says, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God, that you are not your own? You were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies. Paul uses the word temples here very specifically because our bodies are meant for so much more, and that's our third point, where he uses the word temple because in that time, whether it was Aphrodite or one of the other Greek gods, or whether you were Jewish thinking about the temple in Jerusalem, our bodies, the temples were something specific. It was set apart. It was meant to be kept pure. The temple was different than a building. It was different than a house or a restaurant. It's set apart. It's different. It's separate. Our bodies are meant for so much more. And if you're a Christian, if you've accepted Christ into your life, then the God of the world literally lives inside of you. Your skin and bones and flesh are literally the mortar and bricks and pillars of that time. God lives inside of you. Our bodies are bought at a price. They belong to God. They're just on loan. We don't own these bodies. But Paul is telling them and giving them that word picture that God lives inside of you, and you're taking God to that sexual sin. You're taking them to that bed. The fourth point that I want to talk about, if we can go back to verse 18, Paul says, flee from sexual immorality. Flee from sexual immorality. This word flee in the Greek is the word fugo. Fugo, this is one of those times where the English language is a little imprecise. The word fugo literally does translate to flee, but more accurately, it translates to flee constantly, to continually run from. The word flee, if I just read that, it kind of tells me, run, and once I'm away, I'm good and I can move on to something else. But Paul is telling us through the word fugo to run constantly. It is a continual decision. You aren't done making that decision. You have to run continually from it. It doesn't say manage your sexual immorality. It doesn't say resist sexual immorality. And a lot of times with teenagers and even myself getting into this world, what we like to do is we like to say, okay, how far can I go? Where's that line? If I do this, am I still pure? Am I still good? But then if I cross this line, now I'm in the realm of bad. Now I'm in the sexual immorality. Where is that line? And we like to toe the line and figure out where that is and stay just this side of that line. Paul is telling us to flee from sexual immorality, to run from it, have it in our rearview mirror and keep going, to not stop. It is a constant, every day, every moment decision to run from it and keep ourselves pure. You guys, our bodies are meant for so much more. We are meant for so much more than sexual immorality. We are meant as a living sacrifice for God. We are meant to be so much more than what we're telling ourselves. As a matter of fact, in Romans 12, verse 1, I don't know if we have this verse. Here we go. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. You guys, our bodies, we're meant for the worship of God. Our bodies are meant for purity, to love God as a temple of the body. In the middle school group and in the high school group at Fusion last school year, we were going through a series kind of like this. And we explained it kind of in this way. We had them take a piece of paper and fold it in half long ways. And on one side, we had them fill in the want to haves, the things that they would like to have in their future spouse. Brown hair, brown eyes, loves coffee, plays with dogs, stuff like that. On the other side, we had them fill in the must-haves, the things that are unchanging, the things that you are not willing to compromise on, is loving, is a good person, is honest, loves basketball, whatever it is. And they had them fill out this side. And the concept is what I would tell them, actually, if I can back up a little bit, I got ahead of myself a little bit. When I graduated high school and I moved to San Diego, like I told you guys, I didn't quite know what sex and dating was, and so I was figuring out on my own. I was serving in a middle school group at the church I was attending at the time, and the pastor at that time, he said this one thing that stuck with me. He said, "How many of you guys think that you will be married someday?" And all the hands went up. "How many of you guys think that God knows who your spouse is?" And all the hands went up. Okay, now with that, guys, your wife is out there right now on a date with someone else. Girls, your husband is out there right now on a date with someone else. How far do you think it's okay for your wife, guys, to go with that other guy? Girls, how far is it okay for your spouse, your husband, to go with that girl? And turn that around, how far do you think it's okay for you to go being that person's future husband or that person's future wife? Turn that around on them. And it kind of gets their heads moving in that direction. And that kind of leads us into our second point, our second principle that we're going to look at today, and has to do with the right one. The world has a lot of lies about the right one, that we have to, once we find that right one, then everything's going to be good, that we're going to be complete. That person's going to fix me. They're going to fix everything, and they're going to make it good, and they're going to fill that hole. The world tells us that when we find that right one, that love is just a feeling, that we can move on, that it doesn't matter, that if we want to pull up the second point up there anytime, once I find that right or wrong girl, everything will be perfect. Everything will be perfect when I find them. And that love is just a feeling. Love is when I feel it. When I feel it, I'll know what that right person is. I'll know who that is. And if I don't feel it, I can move on, because love is just an emotion. Love is just a feeling. Now, God tells us something very different in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if you want to turn there with me. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we're going to start in verse 4. And these verses we've heard a lot of times, but we're going to learn something from them. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered and keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. The perspective of finding the right one, that there's that right person out there and I need to find the right one, is an extremely selfish perspective if we think about it. It's saying, I'm perfect. I'm perfect in the way I am, and I have my list, and I need to find someone that fulfills this list. Otherwise, they're not the right one for me, because I don't need to work on anything. I'm perfect. I need to find someone that fills that hole in my life. And when we had the fusion group write down, in the youth group write down all those things, we turned it back on them with that concept of your wife is out there or your husband is out there. And we had them look at their list on that uncompromisable side and say, how many of these things in your list do you satisfy? Are you a trusting person? Are you a giving person? Are you a patient person? And the list would go on, and they would look at their own list, and how many of these things do you satisfy? Andy Stanley, in one of his messages, and Andrew used this quote a while back in one of our the series of the new rules of love, sex, and dating. I encourage you guys to go back and watch that. The quote is, we need to be becoming the person we're looking for is looking for. We need to be becoming the person we're looking for is looking for. And that concept of having the folded paper in half had their minds moving in that direction. And Paul here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is giving us our new definition of what love is. That love is patient, that love is kind, it does not envy, and so on, and it would go on. Now, I love my wife. I love my son. I also love tacos. I love Chipotle. I'm going to try to convince my wife to go to Chipotle for lunch probably, because I could really go for Chipotle right now. But if I loved my wife the same way I love Chipotle, we would have an issue. And if I loved Chipotle the same way I love my wife, you would have a reason to lock me up, because that would be a problem. And here, these verses in 1 Corinthians are a lot of times are taken out of context. The Bible has, in the New Testament, there are, in the Greek, if you look at the Greek, there are essentially 4 different words that translate to love in the English language. They're used a few times throughout the Bible, and you have to look at and figure out what is being said here. The 4 types, the first one is eros, and that's the romantic love. It's the bubblies in the stomach. It's a romantic love. The second one is philos, and again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these. Andrew can probably pronounce them better. I'm not a Greek scholar or anything. But the second one is philos, or philos, that it's a brotherly love. It's a love of a close friend. The third one would be storge, the love of a family member. You know, a brother, a mother, a father, a sister, whatever it is. It's a family love. And the fourth one is agape, the true love, the divine love, the love that God has for his people, the love that God has for Jesus Christ. It's a divine love. And when these verses are read in church services, in wedding ceremonies, a lot of times they're understood to be the eros love, the romantic love. But actually, when you look at it, Paul is saying agape. It's the agape love. It's the true love. This is the true definition of love. And agape love, by definition, has nothing to do with emotions. It has nothing to do with a feeling. It has nothing to do with what's going on inside of you. It's a true love. Paul is giving us a new definition for what love is, that it's not emotional, that it's a true, to the core of what it is. And we need to be looking at this as our definition of what love is. And how many of these do you satisfy? Instead of the looking for that right person, finding that right one that satisfies your list, how about we look at the real definition of what love is and look at how many of these do I satisfy? Am I a patient person? Am I a kind person? Do I not envy? And the list goes on and on. Why do you think that it is that married couples that divorce, that those people continue to have more divorced marriages? It's going to be a touchy topic for a lot of people, but why do you think that is? I think that the real point that we need to be looking at is that the common denominator is you, is the person. It doesn't, however, if a man is divorced 3 or 4 times, they're the common denominator between all of those. It's not the other women, they're the common denominator. It's because our perspective, and this is the human nature, is to, this person didn't satisfy my needs, so I'm going to leave them and move on to somebody else. This person hurt me, so they're no longer satisfying my needs, so I'm going to leave and move on to someone else. And that's human nature. We all want to do that. We all want to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Isn't that Einstein's definition of insanity? I mean, humans, we're insane. We like to do the same thing many times and expect different results. But we need to be, our true perspective, our real perspective is we need to be becoming the one we're looking for, is looking for. So we learned in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 that our bodies are meant for so much more. We're meant for so much more than sexual sin and the selfishness of the sexual sin. We're meant to be a pure, worshipful body, that our bodies are meant to worship God and they're meant for his purpose. We learned from 1 Corinthians chapter 13 what the new definition of what love is. What does love mean? What is it? What's the purpose of it? What is love? And we need to realign our perspective. But where do we go from here? What is our next step? Where do we just say, look at those things and say, okay, those are great? We need to realign our perspectives completely. If you want to turn to Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. This is another book that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. And here Paul says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God." Our purpose is we need to be focusing on God. We need to have our focus be on Christ, not on our own selfish desires, not on our own selfish wanting to seek that perfect person. We need to be seeking Christ. Andrew gave a talk, Pastor Andrew gave a talk on this passage a while back, and I loved what he said. He said we need to be redefining where God is in our lives. That is God a component of your life, or is he your life? And he further said, and I want to get the quote right, he said, the question, God, what do I do with my life? What do I do with my life? The question becomes, God, what should I do with your life in me? Our perspective changes. Our perspective changes away from the selfish desires, away from our own wants, away from our own desires to God's desires. What do you want, God? What do you want for my life? And if when we focus on Christ, we can help to redefine our own lives.